These days I'm teaching a class at IU about representations of war in fiction. So we read books about war, watch movies, and also play games. And it is now the time of the class when we are talking about World War II. So we are reading The Thin Red Line, we watch Saving Private Ryan, and I also want to play some games about World War II, and I thought that in conjunction with the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, it could be interesting for the students to play games about D-Day. So I picked up this game from Victory Point Games. It's called Paul Koenig's D-Day, Utah and Omaha. It is one of 3 sets that Victory Point Games produced, and each set contains 2 full games about the different beaches that were the target of the Allied invasion on D-Day. This one is the one covering the 2 American beaches. All of these games are based on the same system, so once you learn the system for one of the sets, then you can play all of the games in the set. The 2 battles in this set are 2 completely independent games. Same system, but independent maps, independent sets of counters. That means that you could have different players playing both games at the same time, which is not always the case with other games that come with multiple scenarios, multiple maps, but sometimes they share some of the counters. Well, not here. The level of complexity is very low. This is an introductory war game, or say introductory newbie friendly. A war gamer can play it. It is not a game that is so simple that there would be no meat for a war gamer to sink his teeth in. Now, let me show you the game. Let me show you how the game works. So we'll talk about the system first, and to do so we will use the map for Omaha. As you can imagine, at the beginning of the game, here you see the setup. The Allies, in this case the Americans, are landing on the beach, and there is a line of German defenses there. Some German units in key points behind the defenses. The Americans are trying to break through the initial line of defenses and then to reach key points, towns, and cities in this area here. Also, they will score victory points at the end of the game by exiting undamaged units from the map from specific exit areas. Let's get a little closer. Units are represented by the counters that you see there, and they have 2 numerical values printed on them: the combat strength and the movement allowance. Combat units are divided by groups indicated by the colors that you see on the counters. So here we have the light blue, white, red. Each such group has an activation chip that is placed together with the other activation chips in a draw cup, in a randomizer cup. And then simply players will draw cheats randomly, and the group corresponding to the cheat that was just drawn will activate. So you draw a cheat, activate all the units that are still on the map belonging to that group, and then you draw another random cheat, activate that group, another random cheat, so on and so forth until the game, until the turn is over, when all of the available cheats have been drawn. Phases of the turn. Well, this is D-Day, so you need landings. You need to simulate what happens during the landings. There is a fairly abstract system at the beginning, in the first couple of turns, which is when American units land, and that may happen the first turn, but also in the following turns during reinforcements. So during the landing phase is when you add new units on the board, on the beach, following the schedule or reinforcement, but it is also when the landing units may take fire. You simply roll a die for each unit that just landed on the beach, and you look at the result. And the line that you use depends on the turn that you're playing. In a morning turn, you use that line, afternoon, that line, evening, that line. It's pretty simple. For each unit, you roll a die and you see if it's a miss or a hit, or early on June 6, 2 hits. Hits are recorded by using these markers here that you place under the unit. Suppose this unit took a hit, then I use this marker and I place it on the 1 hit side and I put it simply there. Hit markers also have another side, which is the 2 hits, which you use when a unit that took a hit receives a second one. As you can see, receiving a hit has no immediate effect. The unit can still perform as it did when it was undamaged, but when it takes a second hit, then the combat strength is reduced by 1. And a unit that took 2 hits and takes a third one is removed from the game. Also, during the landing phase, you roll on that table to potentially inflict damage to German units that are adjacent to American units that just landed. After the landing phase, you have the support phase, but that only applies to day turns. So there's a difference between day turns and night turns. In day turns, you roll to determine if either player will receive artillery points. If a player receives those points, then the player receives a corresponding number of markers, and these can be used during combat, can be spent to receive bonuses or to deny bonuses to the opponent. Also, the ally player will roll on this table here to determine how many points of support he receives. And again, these support points are represented by counters that can be spent during combat to receive or to deny bonuses. Then, after support has been assigned, finally it is time to perform operations. This is the phase of the game when you draw activation chits and you activate units on the board. Units that are activated can move up to their full movement allowance, spending movement points as they proceed on the map, depending on the type of terrain that they cross. Some edges also cost movement points, so you spend points as you move along. There's a stacking limit of 2 units that applies at all times, so traffic jams may easily happen here on the beach as allied units are fighting to find a place, to find some room. You can choose to move your activated unit up to its full movement allowance, and in that case you do not attack. You do not perform a fire attack. You may attack if you enter the X that contains an enemy unit. Because of the stacking limit of 2 at all times, and that applies to the total of all units of both players, that means that you can only attack with a unit into an X that contains a single enemy unit, so you don't violate the stacking limit of 2. So you can move, and that includes launching a close assault, or you can perform a full fire attack, which means your unit does not move, but fires against an adjacent hex, and multiple units can combine their fires. So usually you need to activate a unit. Once you're done, you activate another one. Once you're done, you activate another one. But with combined fire, you can combine the fire from multiple units against a single target. Full attack, you don't move, you fire against an enemy position. There is a special rule: Germans that are the target of full fire attacks from the Allies can choose to retreat instead of sitting there and taking the brunt of the fire attack, but that's an option that's only available for the Germans. Third option, which is after either movement and no fire, fire no movement, is a little bit of both. You can move at half your movement allowance and then fire at half of your combat strength, or vice versa. Fire first and then move. Now, to resolve fire, you indicate the unit or units that is firing and the target hex. Then you total the combat strength of the unit or units. Suppose that unit is firing in there, then we have a total of 4. That's the attack factor. Players at that point may spend support points, artillery points to add or to subtract to that total. So the attacker would add points based on the support points. Each support point or artillery point is +1, and the defender would spend artillery or support to reduce that. So the attack factor, the total attack factor may be modified by supports. You also need to look at the terrain into which the fire attack is being performed, because that also may modify the total. After that, you have your total attack factor. You roll a d6. If you rolled less than your total, then in your attack, then you inflict a hit on the opponent. If you roll equal to your fire attack, then it's an exchange. Both the attacker and the defender receive a hit. If you roll higher than your total combat factor that you're using when you're attacking, then you simply miss. Nothing happens. But what happens if you're performing a close combat? Well, if you're performing a close combat, you move in there, and then simply after you total the attack factor of the attacker and that of the defender, at that point the two players simply start exchanging fire. That means the defender fires first, and if after the attacker is still there, then the attacker fires. And they keep firing at each other until at least one of them has left the hex. Now, when you receive a hit in a full fire or in a combined fire or in a mobile fire, you may retreat from the hex in which you are. If you receive a hit in close combat, you must retreat. That means that in an exchange, both players will receive a hit. In exchange in close combat, both players will receive a hit. Both players will have to retreat. Otherwise, the attacker or the opponent will have to retreat. This is for the operations phase, that is, you activate units to move or attack, or move and attack, or attack and move. Once the operations phase is over, the turn may be over if that is a day turn. In a night turn, things work differently. In a night turn, you do not have the support phase, you do not have the operations phase. Simply what happens is that the players roll to determine the number of replacements that they will receive, and you use replacements to remove hits from units that have been damaged. Replacements will not allow you to bring back units that have been removed from the game. After the replacement phase, the German player may redeploy units, may move units on the board. And that's pretty much it. That's for the night phase, for the night turns. So the game continues until the end of the game, as determined by the turn track, which is this one, and at that point you score points based on the victory conditions of the scenario, and you determine who the winner is. In this scenario, in the Omaha scenario, as I said, you need to eliminate enemy units and to control locations on the map in order to win. And as you can see, it's a pretty frontal situation, as you may very well expect from Omaha. A lot Americans coming from here, Germans being there and smashing each other as the Americans are trying to get out of the beaches. There are cliffs. These edges here are impassable because they're cliffs. That makes it tough, because the Americans only have some bottlenecks that they have to go through. The other scenario, Utah, has a different map with much less problematic terrain here. After the units land, they can move into, well, less problematic. Less problematic because you don't have cliffs, but then actually as soon as you get off the cliffs, you get in swamps, unless you're using roads. So you still have bottlenecks, but are not as prohibitive as those ones. Also, the different flavor of the game is given by the fact that this is not so much of a frontal confrontation, because yes, you have some units that will come from here, but you also have many allied units that have been landed on the map because the para dropped there. So you have a more mobile situation. It's not just a clear front. You have units moving around. It's a little more cat and mouse because your German units are on the map trying to retain control of key locations such as towns and cities, and then you have paratroopers that landed in various locations and that will try to reconnect with the advancing forces that are landing from Utah Beach. This is a game that is very simple in essence. The rulebook is 4 pages. Somehow those 4 pages are not the best written set of rules that I've ever seen. It took me longer than I expected. For a game this simple, I thought it would take me less. It took me as if it was a manual 8 pages long. Hey, it's still a short manual, but I'm just saying a little longer than I would have expected. Nothing too complicated. If you're confused, you set up the game, you start playing the game, go through the motions, following the procedures outlined in the book, and then you will realize how things work. And that really shouldn't be all that hard. The game is very accessible. This is a game that is meant to be a gateway to war games, and I think it really can work well in that way. Especially if you have a war gamer teaching it to you, if you're not learning the game directly from the rule book. For this reason, I believe that this is a game that indeed will work well in my class. It's a game that I think I can play with my students. They're college students. They are not war gamers, and maybe some of them are not even gamers, but I think that this is a game that I can teach easily. There are optional rules if you want to add complexity to the game, if you want to add more historical detail, but I haven't played with those. I really played only with the basic rules because I wanted to see if the games in this set are interesting enough in that fashion, and they are. When you're playing the basic games, these are games that you can take out of the Ziploc bag, set up and play in about an hour or so. Less or more depending on the players and the experience of the players, but definitely a quote-unquote filler war game, not a filler in the sense of like a game you play in 10 minutes, but compared to other games, definitely a light, quick game. Also, setting up is important. You have sometimes small war games that play in around an hour, but maybe take half an hour to set up, so that's kind of like a bummer. This really is a game that is very self-contained. You can take out in a break that is not too long, and you get to enjoy it. Also, the games in the set are definitely solitaire friendly thanks to the chit pool mechanics that prevents you from planning ahead too much. You have a general sense of what you want the Germans to do, the Americans to do, but still as you're playing both sides at the best of your possibilities, things will change vastly if the Germans activate all before the Americans do, or vice versa, or different combinations will surprise you, will present you with challenges and unpredictable situations and events. The same can be said for the landings, the landings rolls that inflict damage on the units. From game to game, the units will receive different damage. Damage will be spread out differently, which adds replay value to the game, but also, again, it adds unpredictability, which means adding more interest and more challenges if you're playing the game by yourself. I found both games to be perfectly soloable, but I think also that they're interesting enough and fast-moving enough to keep players engaged when they're playing one-on-one. The level of detail, historical detail, is not high, as you can expect, and I think that's perfectly fine. These are games that do not pretend to be anything different from what they are, which is generic representations of the historical events, painted with pretty broad brushstrokes, and yet still the image, the historical event that is portrayed is recognizable. Still, there is enough historical flavor to feel interested in the historical event, and definitely also enough gameplay challenges. I like how the two games and the set really play differently from the frontal push that you have in Omaha to the more dynamic and multifocal action that you have in Utah. Good, definitely good. I like the fact that both games are independent, different maps, not like one on the opposite side of the other. Different maps, different sets of counters. I find it to be a good product. I think it's good value for the money. A good design. I also like the fact that once you know the system, you can play many other games in the system. I think that as a light diversion for experienced war gamers, or as a possible first war game or second war game for new people that are interested in the hobby, definitely the D-Day system is a good one. I only played these two battles in the system, the Omaha and the Utah, and I enjoyed them. I enjoyed them both in different ways for different reasons because they have different progressions, but I found them both enjoyable. Both can be used in a teaching setting like the way we intend to use them in the future. So I'm definitely pleased with D-Day, Omaha, and Utah Beach. Keep it in mind, if you're looking for a light game, for an entry game, I think this could be a good option.